So with that being said, I would like to introduce to you to our next speaker, Reinier. He's a data journalist at a Dutch investigative platform, Argos. And Reinier has covered corona for a Dutch public radio, NPO Radio 1, and felt that from the beginning of the outbreak, news desks got overwhelmed by foreign numbers, statistics, metrics, and you name it. So from arrows to case fertility rates to exponential functions and log scales, Reinier is convinced that corona crisis is a golden age for the data journalists. That is, if they can make these scientific measurements accessible for a broad audience. So he's here to tell us on how he did it. Welcome, Reinier, and we're looking forward to learn from you.
So yeah, I would like to tell you partly about my journey in the corona outbreak, and I would like to address actually two audiences, I think. First are the journalists or people that would like to become data journalists or are data journalists themselves, and showing you my working progress and the tools and techniques that I used. And maybe you can also use these tools and techniques or ask me how I did it. And the second is maybe a larger audience, and that are the colleagues and those that are thinking about maybe hiring a data journalist, and what can a data journalist bring to the table or to the news text? Why and how are they actually useful? And I think COVID-19 and the outbreak is a good showcase for it. So first, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. It was already a little bit done by Charlie. I studied political science, philosophy, and artificial intelligence. So pretty broad. It's also why I learned how to program. Then I worked as a data journalist at The Correspondent. It's an online platform, a journalistic platform. And since February, I work at Argos. And that is mainly focused at investigative journalism. So I could just shake everybody's hands in the first 3 weeks, and well, then the pandemic hit. And I'd like to go back to March this year, when in the first week I was just kind of looking at this website that you probably all know. It's All World and Data. It's a great website, and it was pretty early with just sharing data and insights about corona. And I fell actually immediately from my chair because I was already a little bit talking with some of my friends, especially my nerd friends, and you could see a little bit of a divide also on Twitter, and also with people who were just looking at the numbers and looking at how a virus behaves. And they immediately actually became, well, what you could say, the alarmist. And I think I was one of them, because if you just added the numbers and did the math, you could understand that, well, for example, with the Netherlands, that has 70 million people, and if you know that 80% gets infected, we knew that if the hospitals if the hospitals were too full, 1 or 2% would die. So you could immediately see what this pandemic would do. And just from a personal perspective, if you just work at a new organization, it's also a little bit rough to immediately sound the alarm. I was a little bit afraid to be that guy that is really in a panic or alarmic, and if it's not true, you're that guy, that you cannot trust. But in the end, I just decided that I should trust my number instinct, my data instinct, and if the numbers are right, it's probably okay. So I collected a lot of data from all the platforms that were out there at that moment. You probably know Johns Hopkins. There was this Imperial College report that did modeling studies. I talked with mathematicians, modelers, epidemiologists. Look how simulations work, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. That was important. So I really did, I think, what a data journalist should do. Try to understand the numbers, because it's also a part that not all the other journalists can do and don't have the time for. And especially when, the pandemic really hit. So there was like 2 or 3 weeks later in March, my employee Argos gave me all the time that I needed to dive into this virus. And I started to write very short and simple articles with the really basic stuff, actually, not only to educate the others, educate my audience, but also to educate myself. Because in the beginning of this pandemic, of course, I also didn't know anything about viruses. I did about computer viruses, but not about this kind of viruses. So what I try to do is to explain from the point of view of a data journalist how I looked at the numbers, how I looked at the case fertility rate, how exponential growth works, uh, and share that actually with a wider audience. And I think it was pretty successful because in the Netherlands, um, we do, of course, the audience doesn't. Not everybody reads the New York Times or the Financial Times. I mean, they did that very well, but I wanted to bring the same insights to a Dutch audience. So what you see here right now are some of the articles that I wrote. It was, of course, about flattening the curve. That was then the main issue. And for example, I tried to look at the growth numbers. So if you, instead of looking at the increase every day, you actually want to know if it grows if you look at 7 days and look at the trends. So I try to focus at the trends instead of the daily numbers, and it's still what I do. Of course, Argos is investigative journalism, and I kind of left that actually because I decided this was so important to have this data journalism view in the media, in the Dutch media, that I just did actually a daily news cycle, what I was not used to, but was interesting nonetheless. So I would also like to talk a little bit about tools and the techniques that I used. And in the beginning, that was really basic. I started with writing code in Python, actually. But the data was so messy, especially so you had John Hopkins and Orwell on data, and they tried to make it structured, but for the Netherlands it was never sufficient. So a lot of data was just not out there, and they were always too late. Well, what you can see here, I mean, for a data journalist, I mean, maybe it looks impressive, but for a nerd or someone who can program, it's a bit embarrassing because I did everything manually. So this sheet that you look, I filled in every day. I fill it in with the new numbers, and then I let it calculate with pretty easy formulas. Calculate what was happening right there, so I could actually measure the trends and see if hospitals would get full, what's the death rate, if a lot of people were dying in intensive care or in normal hospital care, and that gave me my ideas for new articles, because I looked at the patterns, and then I thought, okay, this is something interesting. This is a new trend that I'm seeing here. Okay, let's write an article. And then, of course, your classical journalism also starts interviewing people, writing a story, trying to make it appealing so that everyone can actually understand what you're meaning. The cool thing about it, this is another thing that so you can just see how I worked. I plotted all the graphs. It was in Google Sheets, by the way. I never used Google Sheets for things like this, but with this I could share it with other people, and they could look with me. If I did the right thing, they could calculate with me. So Google Sheets is actually a good way to collaborate. And here you could see what the real death rate was in the Netherlands. So instead of looking at the normal death rate where you need corona tests for, the PCR tests, I actually want to know how more people are actually dying now instead of years before. So you have different models for it, and that also became an article. So not fancy until then, actually, just Google Sheets and Excel. For visualizations, I used Flourish. You maybe know it. I actually really began to like it. It's really beautiful. It's very polished. I think we could use it for free. So it has a great community actually, and good manuals. The only disadvantage I think is that it's very indirect. So if you always have to upload your data first on their website, and then you can use it. So if your data changes, well, then you constantly have to upload it again. where you actually just want to pull the data from a source and calculate it immediately instead of constantly uploading it. It's like a little bit like what you have to do with Google Drive. You always have to upload your stuff there before you can work on it. I find it a bit annoying, but I mean, it's beautiful for publishing. So I did all the calculations on my own laptop. And then when I published, I always did it in Flourish because it's just way more beautiful. And if you can see at the graph right there, it's pretty nice, especially because I'm the only data journalist at my newsroom. So there's not someone who does the visuals or something. And we also don't have a developer. So, it's a good toolbox actually. So then I want to go further to June and July. And there's this, I thought it was a Dutch expression actually, but it's also an English expression. It's fix the roof when the sun is shining. So in June, the cases were low. I think everywhere in Europe and in Northern America as well. And what actually happened is that people got tired of Corona, what is understandably. Me too, actually. But then I thought, okay, well, now I have to build for this autumn. And now I really have to build something. So I cannot just do this manually forever. I mean, it would get tiresome. And it's, of course, not the most trustful idea to do everything in your keyboard. I wanted to automate it and I wanted to write scripts. So I decided that with the people that I was conversing with all the time about Corona, mathematicians, coders, all kind of nerds in their free time, to make a repository on GitHub. GitHub is a way that you can collaborate with each other and share code and work on the same code. So we actually built software in the end. Right now it is software, and I forked a part of it. It's called the Corona Ticker. It's a daily update. Our Dutch RIVM, it's kind of the ECDC of the Netherlands, the institute that should have given the Corona numbers and advises the government, and they stopped with doing it every day because it was June and Corona was gone. So I built the Corona Ticker on the Dutch Public Radio website that I had access to, with the daily numbers of Corona and with a few lines of commentary. So an interpretation from what is actually happening according to me. So you can see yesterday I published a new one, as I do every day. You can see in blue the trend in the Netherlands. It's right now it's stabilizing. So we were going down, but not anymore. So for Christmas, we have to think what are we going to do next, and that's also what I write when I write an interpretation about it. I think my role as a data journalist that I don't only say the daily numbers. It's not like the weather, but that I want to try to focus on the trends, look at the patterns. What patterns do you see in the data? What does it mean for Christmas? So if you extrapolate this, so that's all things that I do on the backside. So I don't publish that, but I use it, for example, when I'm once a week on the radio, where I do a Q&A with live on radio, where readers and listeners can ask me questions about the data. Well, it's very popular. It has become very popular, and in people's daily habit to look at the numbers and look at my Corona Ticker at 250,000 weekly visits. And what's interesting is that it's written together with a lot of people actually. And they use it for all kind of other analysis. They put it on Twitter, and I use it especially for this. So what did I use? I used R, actually not because I like it, but because other people liked it, and I could. I've learned it in the past. So R and Rmarkdown is a tool that you can write HTML with, so you don't have to type everything. For collaboration is Git and GitHub, as I said, is great. And visualizations, this is all in ggplot. It's a visual thing from R. And bbplot, I would like to say, is how you get these graphs. It's from the BBC, and it has a great manual and very good documentations and tutorials actually. And of course, you need to write clearly so people can actually understand it. So then I would like to go to what I think are the lessons for everybody from this idea, except from the tools that I use that you can maybe use. Is maybe one important thing is that data journalists are nerds, and I think in this COVID epidemic that's a good thing. And they are, I think, less susceptible for things as press briefings and what major institutions think. I didn't really actually read press briefings. I just looked at the numbers, and the computer is not changing if you use any social criterion if you try to convince it. So you have just to get to the evidence, get to the numbers, and let them speak. And as a coder, it doesn't help you to think the same thing as your group. So especially in the beginning of the pandemic, I think it helped me that I was just looking at the evidence and not listening too much at people who said, well, we've been here before, we had viruses before, and it was always not that bad. Just look at the data is, I think, often and not as susceptible for social alignment is can often be a good thing at your news desk to have just one guy who is looking at the world from a different angle. I think a data journalist is, well, maybe a good person in a pandemic, or it could also be an economic crisis or another crisis to do that. The other one is, and I think I have to be thankful to my employer, that is that a data journalist needs more time to develop tools, skills, network confidence, and knowledge. So I just told you how I went from really like manually typing in things in Google Sheets, and in the end, you see part of my script. Well, it has like, I don't know, 50 files right now with code. And I also needed time to develop it, to learn these new visualization tools and libraries. And I also needed to build a network with mathematicians and other people, and of course, confidence in and knowledge about this virus. So I think a data journalist maybe even needs more than normal journalists, and you just need to give the time so you can kind of comprehend all the data that's coming here and then make interesting stories about it for a broad audience. So that was, I think, my story. I hope everyone can, pick its lesson from it. And right now, I'm working still, of course, on Corona, probably until everyone is vaccinated. And I'm also working on housing in the Netherlands, especially social housing. So if you would like to contact me, of course, these are my contact information. And if there are any questions.
Hi, Reinier, how are you? Yes,
Hi.
we have many questions. Let's start for the first one we had that comes from Chris Dalby. Chris asks, how do you train editors and journalists to write explain data sets in an informative, accessible, and understandable way?
How I train to write about them.
Editors and journalists.
I have to do it. I think everything myself. So in the end, so I was a really bad writer in the beginning. I was a good coder, but a bad writer. So for me, it was the other way around. So if you come from a more coding background, a more mathematic background, the writing part is really hard. So I had like mentors and teachers, are very good journalists that just teach me how I should write an article. That was for me very hard. But I know for them it's very hard to program is super hard, of course, but also to make data sets, for example, in Excel. And that's how I use them. I help them to look at the numbers, how to interpret numbers, and basic mathematics. So it is kind of, how do you teach them? I don't know. I think for me it's learning by doing and giving your colleagues time to understand it.
Good answer. Let me ask you another question from Merced Ross. Merced asks, in Spain, journalists have been criticized for abusing the data and not showing the story behind data. Do you think it is essential to publish or show the data with personal stories?
I share all the data with others, so everyone can actually access it. So it's on GitHub. was not in the beginning, but also Google Sheets. I gave everybody the links to my data sets so they can actually look at it themselves, and also provide all the sources. So it's pure transparency, actually. In the beginning, I thought, so I'm doing all this work, and now all my colleagues, but also competitors, can also just use the work because they don't have to do all the stuff. But then I thought I find so there's a competitive problem here that could be interesting for another talk maybe. But in the end, I found transparency and collaboration more important. So did I for abuse? I don't know. I maybe you can fight abuse by being fully transparent. So here's my code. Here are my sheets. Here's my data. This is where it's from. And then everyone can look at themselves. And the interesting thing from, I think, both journalists, but also from like the data community, is that they're very critical and always check all the sources. So I have a lot of questions always from, well, you use that source, why? Well, then you're gonna talk about it. So be
Okay,
transparent.
thank you so much, Reinier. We don't have more questions, but everybody's praising you, how you are a Google Sheet artist and that they love your work.
All right. Thank you.
so
If there are
much.
questions, you can ask me by emailing.
Okay, thank you so much, Reinier.
Thank you.